episode number 212. Hello, you're listening to the Career Changemaker podcast. Having the courage to leave a career that you have worked hard to build and try something else can be tough. So in each episode, we dive into key career change strategies so that you have a clear understanding of what is required to transition into a new role or a new industry without feeling like you have to start at the bottom or have to take a massive pay cut, because #ain't nobody got time for that. If you are ready for frank and honest discussions about how to become a career change maker, keep listening. I'm your host, lawyer turned career strategist and executive coach, Janine Esbrand. Hello, and welcome to today's episode. I'm excited to be diving into an interview with an awesome guest. I'm going to be speaking to Gillian Shapiro, who is a consultant who specializes in supporting organizations with building better relationships internally, who supports with diversity and inclusion, and just does a lot to make workplaces better. So my mission is to support people with changing their careers for the better. So we have an amazing conversation where she drops so many nuggets as she shares her experience, her journey of finding work that was right for her and finding an environment that was right for her, and what she's been doing through her consultancy. So without further ado, let's dive into this conversation with Gilly. So before we dive into our discussion, do you want to start off by just introducing yourself and just telling the audience a bit about you?
I will. Thanks so much, Janine. And I'm nervous and excited to be here with you today. So I'm an organisational development consultant professionally. I'm also a coach and a researcher. And I run my own small consultancy practice called Shapiro Consulting. And I've done that for, coming up for 20 years next year. So that's something we might talk about. That's a bit of a celebration. And I specialise in work around relationships within the workplace, building really productive relationships, and also diversity and inclusion. And on a personal level, Janine, I live down in Sussex in the UK with 2 lovely children, a very troublesome dog, and a wonderful husband.
I love it. So there's so much I want to dive in and ask you about. Before we do that though, I'm just interested for you to share a bit about your journey. So you've been running your consultancy for 20 years, but what led you there? Like, where did you start out with your career? And then how did you end up saying, actually, I want to do this type of work and go into, business for yourself?
Yeah, okay. I was reflecting on that this morning, of course, before we're getting together. So at the start of my career, I actually started out in an academic research department. So I was a research fellow, and it was a very business oriented research department that focused on innovation. And I did research work. It was such a fun, wonderful time. I did research work around innovation, but also diversity and inclusion, although we didn't use that terminology back in those days. So I've always been looking at how do relationships, how people are understood, how do behaviours in the workplace at that point impact on organisations' desire for greater innovation. And alongside that, I did a doctorate. I was doing a doctorate at the same time, which was looking at the experience of women working in technology and going into leadership positions. And I was lucky enough to do research with organisations across Europe. So I was working quite closely in the European Commission. In fact, at an early point in my career, I was a UK representative within the European Commission on gender equality. It was an amazing opportunity, and I got to meet and work with experts on gender equality from around Europe, which at the time was actually only 12 member states. That's how long ago it was. The European Union was much smaller in those days. But it was an amazing opportunity. So I got to travel and work with lots and lots of different organisations. And I'm trying to remember how long, but I think I was there for, I don't know, between sort of 7 and 10 years. And I then decided it was time for a change.
Mm.
And I was unsure whether I wanted to work in an organisation or actually whether I wanted to set up my own practice. I knew I wanted to get more into consultancy work as opposed to research work. I wanted the more applied aspect of the work that I was doing. And I applied for a job in a corporate. I think I needed to know I could get it. So I applied for a job in a corporate and I was offered it, but I decided to turn it down and start my own practice, which I began as a sole trader. And I then, a few years later, turned into a limited company and grew a little bit more.
Oh, I love
But
it.
the interesting thing, it wasn't a huge leap because as a researcher in academia, big part of that role is deciding what the research should be, designing that research, applying for funding for the research so that you had a job, and then doing it. So that experience of really carving out the work, making sure that it was well funded, and then going on and delivering it, which is a lot of what we do as sole traders or in our own businesses, is what I was doing all the way from the get-go in my career.
Yeah. Well, I love that because not oftentimes people don't draw the comparisons between what they have been doing and then what they want to do, because you could see it as a big jump. You could say, well, I went from being in academia and research to then launching my own business, which you did do. But then the fact that you saw the similarities allowed you to kind of make that transition more seamlessly, it sounds like.
Yeah, I think that's a really good observation because, over the years, I've spoken to many, many people who are looking to make the leap from corporate or from large organizations into setting up on their own. And I think for many of them, it feels a really big jump because you've got that whole machinery behind you. You're used to having that salary every month. And for me, it wasn't such a big jump. I did it quite early on in my career for a start, but also I was very used to that discipline of funding my own post. Yes. Or indeed funding other people, some of other people's posts as well. So it wasn't such a big leap in that way. And I think I've always had a very independent spirit. So
yeah,
that served me well.
And when you've been running your business for this length of time, how have you shifted and changed as the market has changed? Because you mentioned, back then you started working in diversity and inclusion, but the landscape around that then versus what it looks like now must be very, very different. So how have you found, the need or the desire to adapt the type of work that you're doing based on how the market has moved?
Yeah, that's a really good question. Well, I think, one of the really important things, of course, is to always pay attention to what's going on in the environment, the context in which we're working and what's coming up. So staying relevant and always adapting and adjusting. I mean, one thing is, even though I've expanded greatly the work that I do and how I do it, diversity and inclusion is still absolutely central. And I guess the adaptation there is, I started in that field really looking at gender and gender equality, and I wasn't really looking at intersectionality at all, the experiences of different women. But of course, that has grown as my understanding, my knowledge and the openness of organisations has grown. And over the years, I've looked at the experience of lots of different groups in employment, disability, race, mental health, LGBTQ, and so on. So as my knowledge and understanding and as the environment and the context and society has shifted, of course, I've shifted there too. And actually, there is much more openness into really thinking about the role of diversity and inclusion in everyday business compared to when I started out, 25 years ago, which is a good thing, right? That's the work we're doing. But also, and innovation has been a constant, actually. So the themes, it's really interesting. Those themes that I started with are still very relevant now. But right now, the big theme that I'm noticing is the ability, of course, to work with uncertainty and complexity and change, which actually, if I'm honest, Janine, working with diversity and inclusion is working with change. It is working with complexity. It is working with uncertainty. So it's just applying things very differently, but it's very, very relevant.
Yeah.
So again, I think there's small shifts rather than big changes.
Yeah, absolutely. And one of the things that's always intriguing to me is the difference between the types of organizations who say they want to embrace change within their organization, but then don't actually follow through with the initiatives and take on board the guidance that someone like you would give them, and then the ones who do take it on board. So with the work that you've been doing over the years, what are the common themes amongst the types of organizations that just embrace it? What does that look like versus the ones who pay lip service to it? Because I think there's a spectrum, obviously, but
there is. Well, I think I've learned. Is it triage? I think I've learned more over the years of what to ask and what to look out for before I begin work. So one of those things might be, for example, asking to speak to the CEO, or making sure the HRD is absolutely fully on board, and even just asking to have those conversations can tell me something about where the organisation is at in terms of what it really wants to do in terms of change. And of course, I, as a consultant, have a choice. What kind of work do I want to do? Do I want to be doing? And really, all the time, I want to be doing meaningful work. So if I'm not sensing that this work is really important, really meaningful for an organisation, I have a choice. Maybe we're not a good fit.
Yes.
So really understanding, and that's always the case. I mean, sometimes I'm just not the right fit. Sometimes I'm not the right person for the culture of that organisation, and that is fine, because it needs, the best work I find comes through partnership. When we can form a really good partnership, the work can just fly. It's amazing, because I can never know an organisation like the people inside know the organisation, but I can bring a different perspective, and I can bring challenge sometimes in the way that it's quite hard to do internally. So it does need to be a partnership. So that's one of the things I look for as well, is their appetite for partnership.
Yeah, I think that's such a good point, because whether it is you as a consultant offering your services to an organisation, or you as an individual that's looking to work as an employee within an organisation, I don't think enough people view it as a partnership. So especially some of the women that I coach and I work with, it's almost like they go into it feeling like they need to prove themselves. I need to prove that I can do this. I need to prove that I'm worthy of you hiring me, or if you're pitching, I need to prove that I can do the job. But I think many people miss that element of just recognizing that maybe it's not a good fit, and that's okay. Rather than trying to prove yourself, it's is it a good fit? And when you approach it like that, I feel like you show up differently, where you're like, I might not be a good fit. I might be, let's see, versus, okay, I need to prove to you that I am, So I love that. Partnership is what you lead with.
Yeah, that's again, that's a really interesting observation. It takes me, we're talking about career here, right? It takes me right back to the beginning after I graduated. And I don't know if it still happens now, but in those days there was the milk round, there were lots of graduate schemes you could apply for. I was applying for some of them because I wasn't sure what I wanted to do. I did not get accepted to any of them. I was not appointed to any of them. And I look back and I think, yeah, they knew what they were doing. I am so much better working from the outside with corporates or with organisations than working from the inside. So actually I think that was right. That was absolutely right that I didn't get those kind of posts at the time. And then the other thing that occurs to me when you're talking about partnership in that way, of course, it depends where you're at in your career.
Yeah.
But I think as you get further along, your technical abilities or your expertise in in a subject matter is absolutely taken for granted.
Mm-hmm.
So then it becomes about actually what do you bring as a human being?
Yes.
You know, in your present, and that's the goals, I think, that and it's true, you know, if that organization isn't right for you, then why would you want to go there? Because whoever you're talking to, we know that they'll be too good, and they, you know, it's important to go where you're really valued and where you can really shine.
Absolutely. And bringing out that piece, which is like the golden piece, where it's like you as the individual, what do you bring to the table? But so many people downplay that part because they just feel like they need to then fit in. But it's the individuality and like what you uniquely bring to the table that is what creates something awesome, so that you're not just like another consultant or another individual amongst the sea. It's like, oh no, you're Gilly, and actually your blend of experience we can't get anywhere else because it's you, you know? And I think more people need to own that aspect of personality, the quirks, when they're approaching opportunities, because that way you stand out and that way you attract the ones that are actually the right ones for you.
I couldn't agree more, Janine. And I think the work that you do is just so important to enable people to really own that. Because I look back, you know, in my career at various different opportunities, and I think, why didn't I make more of that? Because it was all about self-belief and self-confidence. So, you know, that's a lifelong piece of work.
Yes. It absolutely is. It's not like a quick fix, it's a journey, isn't it? So what are you most excited about? Because it sounds like in the work that you're doing, you get to choose the types of organizations you work with, the projects that you do, and you're doing such amazing work. So like, what big projects are on the horizon, or what work most excites you at the moment? Like, what is actually going on in your world?
Yeah, what's going on in my world? How long have you got? What excites me? I'll tell you, there are three things that excite me, broadly speaking, and they are who I work with as partners, other consultants that I work with, because I'm working with some amazing people, and that excites me. The work itself excites me in that increasingly I am focusing on the importance of relationships at work. Mm-hmm. I'm just fascinated by this, be it as you spoke about, Janine, the creating an environment where people can really be who they are and be valued for that and feel a real sense of belonging in that way excites me, because it just unleashes potential, and not only potential, but a much higher sense of well-being and purpose. And, you know, people just get on fire when we can achieve that. But also relationships, you know, within teams, between teams, with other stakeholders, increasingly. And actually what I'm seeing as times are getting tougher and tougher, what often I'm observing happen is people actually are becoming more insular or holding things more tightly to themselves, when actually the best thing we could all do at this time is come together, because it's no one has the one right answer anymore. So collaboration is becoming more and more important. So that shift, the importance of relationships, I don't think has ever been as important. You know, when things were easier, more predictable, it's much easier to tell people what to do or to sell ideas to them. Now we really need to collaborate, we need to consult with people, we need to involve people, and that requires a different depth of relationship. And so that work I find really interesting and really exciting, bringing people together across boundaries that have kept them apart. I've been doing work particularly around race that has brought people together across the boundaries of race, but not only race, also hierarchy, that power that goes with hierarchy and role. All of that I find so important and really exciting. And then the third piece is, you're right, Janine, when I'm working with organisations that really want to shift, that's exciting because then things can go fast.
Yeah. And how are you finding, I love that relationship is such a big focus for you. How are you finding the whole hybrid working, remote working shift is impacting the relationships? Because I imagine because people are in the living room or in their home office, and it's probably easier to be more insular and you have to make more of an effort to actually stay connected. How are you finding organizations dealing with that as it's become more of a given that we're going to do hybrid working than a exception?
Yeah, I'm mainly seeing it creating problems at the moment because I don't think yet the intentionality that's needed to really think about when do we come together and how do we come together. That's often what's missing. So I'm seem to be doing quite a lot of work with teams in particular that haven't built a relationship. They haven't done that relationship work. And because we've been doing this now, for 3 years, 4 years almost, it's now taking its toll. And often what I hear two things most often when we've had a breakthrough, it's either that, it's just so helpful to get to know each other, to sit in a room together and to understand how and when that needs to happen. And the second big shift is when people say, oh, I feel seen, I feel heard.
Wow.
I feel understood. So I think hybrid, honestly, is totally possible, totally doable. I'm a massive fan. However, we need to really think carefully about when do we come together, who do we come together with, why are we coming together, and how do we need to do this in order to get the best outcomes.
Yeah, so much more intentionality is required.
Completely.
Yeah. Absolutely. Oh my gosh, so insightful. So good. So Gilly, I always ask guests who come on the show if they have a favourite quote or saying, mantra that they love to live by, because it's always inspiring to hear. So do you have one that you can share with us?
Oh, this is so funny. It's a bit like Desert Island Disc, isn't it? Which song would you take? Am I allowed to, Janine? I've got two.
Two, yeah.
Okay, that's so cool. So I have two favourite quotes. I've got them here. One is by, where is it? Let me find it. One is by the Reverend Donald Reeves, and it says, real change happens when those who do not usually speak are heard by those who do not usually listen.
Ooh.
So I use that a lot. That's very good. And then the other one, given that I've been talking a lot about relationships and conversations, and my work is generally through conversations, is by Susan Scott, and she wrote the book Fierce Conversations. It's a really great book. And she says, while no single conversation is guaranteed to transform a company, a relationship, or a life, any single conversation can. Speak and listen as if this is the most important conversation you will ever have with this person. It could be. Participate as if it matters. It does.
Oh, that's like a mic drop. I had my pen in my hand. I had to drop it. So good. Those are such insightful, mind-blowing quotes.
Oh, they're great guiding lights, I think. They really make us stop and think about how we are as we come together as humans in organisations.
Yeah.
I'm glad you like them.
I do. So I'm like literally writing down the book. I'm going to go check that out. Thank you so much for sharing. So if people want to learn more about what you do in your consultancy, connect with you, where should they go?
Oh, that's great to ask. Thank you for that. So www.shapiroconsulting.co.uk, or look me up on LinkedIn. I think I'm on LinkedIn as actually Gillian Shapiro on LinkedIn. So I'd love to hear from people. That would be great. Thank you.
Awesome. Well, thank you so much for spending the time. It's been so insightful and it's been awesome to have you on. So thank you, Gilly.
Oh, it's been a pleasure. Thanks so much, Ginny.
Isn't Gilly just lovely? I really enjoyed our conversation. There were so many things that she shared that really stuck out to me. One in particular was the importance of intentionality when it comes to hybrid working, and the fact that it's imperative that people are seen and people are heard if we want to maintain healthy relationships in the workplace. So good. So good. If you want to connect with Gilly and you want to learn more about her and the work that she is doing through her consultancy, then check out the show notes for today's episode. If you head over to careerchangemakers.com/podcast, you will see this episode and the show notes there. So that's all from me today. Until next time, take care of yourself and keep moving towards your career goals. Thank you so much for taking the time to listen to today's episode. If you enjoyed what you heard, then I want to remind you that caring is sharing. Share this episode out with somebody else and head over to your podcast app to leave us a rating and review. For every rating and review that you leave, it helps us reach more people. It helps more people find the show. So I'd appreciate it if you go and do that right now. Thank you so much. If you enjoyed today's conversation, be sure to subscribe to the show so that you don't miss any future episodes. Also, I would love to know what your biggest takeaway has been from today's episode. Come over and join us in our Career Changemakers community over on LinkedIn so that you can join the conversation there. I look forward to seeing you.